and drive. There are very few laid-back, great leaders. On the other hand, we all can do something about that. The great leader, I believe, if blessed with basic good health, can enhance that by taking steps to exercise and eat the right things, and also take some time off and stretch the brain in a different way and come back to the job with a new spirit and drive. So energy is an important one. Number 5, I'd like to change the definition. I'd like to always link leader, not with manager, but leader with entrepreneur. I believe that the word entrepreneur is too narrowly defined. We all think about the entrepreneur as somebody that starts a business or brings entrepreneurial spirit to basically a business operation. For those of you who out there who are not in the private sector, or you're in the public sector or the nonprofit sector, or even as John with the 2 feet in the public sector and in the private sector, I believe that the spirit of entrepreneurialism can take even large, deeply dug-in bureaucracies and pick them up and move them if you can imbue the bureaucracy with that spirit of entrepreneurialism. Number 6, I think somebody had a message when they gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. I believe the characteristic of the great leader, entrepreneur, is someone who can listen, someone who can genuinely hear what's being said, and basically use the mouth in just about that relationship with the 2 ears. I think the great leader always should have what I call a fallback position. I believe that as you are moving ahead and constantly trying to improve and do what you're doing now, is you have a concept of what you're going to do when something really goes wrong. What's the fallback position? Are you prepared for that? Are you prepared for things going slightly wrong or really wrong? And have you thought through what you're going to do when that happens? I think the true leader, entrepreneur, has an internal sense of demand for excellence. Not a demand that the external people put on him or her, but an internally generated demand for excellence in his own performance, being your own appraiser of exactly how well you're doing and whether your performance measures up to what you want it to be. Second to last, I think is a, I wrote down here, float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. and Cassius Clay had that. But what I mean by that is I think the true leader of the future has to be able to operate on several levels. He or she has to be able to, if you will, float like a butterfly in terms of conceptual approach, in terms of inspirational approach, in terms of all the great things we've been talking about, but also has to have simultaneously the ability to be a hard-nosed taskmaster, to be able to make it work, or bring people around them who will make it work. And there are lots of people who got great philosophies and thoughts and so forth, but it doesn't work, because they either don't have that characteristic themselves, or they've been unable to bring it around. And then my last, number 10, if you will, is a concept of having fun. The day we started Donaldson, Lufkin, and Jenrette, we decided that our 10th corporate objective was going to be to have fun. And by that I mean that if you're going to spend all the hours in the day that you spend in your professional occupation, you better damn well be sure that you're enjoying it, that you're being tickled by it. And I don't mean the ha-ha kind of fun, but I mean the fun and the pleasure of working with people, of accomplishing things, a sense of humor that goes with having fun, the ability to laugh when things really are dark. Not that you don't take them seriously, but a sense of proportion that I wrap up in a sense of fun. I mean, I think people have often asked me what was the, you know, having not been able to keep a job and having done a lot of different things, what was the most enjoyable or fun or satisfying or whatever. And I think back to the early entrepreneurial days. I don't know, Mike, whether you would agree with that, when a band of brothers and a couple of sisters got together, started something new, and really had fun doing it.
Thank you, Bill, for what will have to turn out to be an excellent summary, since we're almost out of time. I love the fun point, and clearly from the energy and the smiles on faces of all of you up here, I hope you were having fun today. But let me add two things from the session, rather than the remarks I thought I would make, that make me incredibly hopeful about not only the prospects of the companies represented here, but also about leadership in general, because two things I heard are incredibly heartening. One, leaders willing to say those words out loud, the three little words, "I was wrong." That ability, then along with curiosity and vision, etc., but that will move us forward and avoid mistakes in the future because of the willingness to deal with them as they occur. The second was, I heard from so many of you, including company founders, that the institution becomes more important than the person, even when the person's name is on the door. That's so important. If we're going to avoid the cult of the imperial CEO who builds empires in his or her own interest, we need that sense that what you're doing as leaders is not only satisfying your own needs and hopefully having fun, but building something greater than yourselves, that survives yourselves, that brings enormous value to the world. And that's a message that I'm so glad that you provided at Davos, especially when global capitalism is still a little bit under attack and discredited. That sense that you want to build greatness into your companies is a wonderful message, and thank you for being willing to engage in this informal, candid discussion. Thank you, all of you, for coming.
Nationality or religion or gender you are, but simply how good you can be. And
Thank
those
you.
attributes, I think, are applicable to all successful companies.
And hopefully yes, we're going to hear many of those threads as we move through the discussion. Bob Nardelli, you also came in from outside to Home Depot. It's a very successful company. So in some ways, in a where it's a clear turnaround because there have been publicly acknowledged problems, as hard as the change problem is, at least everybody knows you have to change. Now, you came into a successful company, but where there were questions about its readiness for the future. So you had to create change, but first you had to establish your leadership. So I'll ask you first the question I think you're always asked. I mean, you took over from founders and you had no retail experience. So how did you establish credibility so that people would follow you?
Well, I would hope after 4 years we'd stop asking that non-retail experience thing. But let me just say, for me, moving into Home Depot, you're exactly right. I was following two founders, Arthur Blank and Bernie Marcus. And they were more than founders. I mean, much like Michael, they were probably like a father figure to now 325,000 associates. So there was a tremendous amount of angst, anxiety over who was this new guy coming in that didn't know retail. They didn't know about me, was a total unknown, and sometimes, worst case, they said, and oh by the way, he's from GE. So what could be worse? He's going to try to GE-ize the company. So it took a lot of, I think year one was about transition before we could start transformation. It was about really clearly articulating and with a tremendous amount of alignment and transparency that we needed to change the culture and we needed a strategy, because what got us here in the first 20-some years wasn't going to get us there. When we took over, the company was about $45 billion. This year we'll do about 72. We're up about 12.5% year over year. And we did it by kind of chiseling into granite a strategy that said we're going to enhance the core, we're going to extend our business, and we're going to expand our markets. And we said we have an overarching core purpose to improve everything we touch. And we know there's an infinite capacity to improve upon everything we do. So it wasn't about changing the past, it was about building off the past. And much like Chuck, I spent the first year really allowing the organization to get to know me, to listen, to learn, and then launch, to really reducing the anxiety and the unknown factors about me. And it seems to have worked fairly well.
So get to know you, and then figure out what to change. What to change is my next question, because this is a company that was known for, you know, many of you, I'm sure, know the orange Home Depot color. It was known for orange-blooded entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, a very strong culture. It was a culture where corporate social responsibility, community service was built in almost from the beginning. Home Depot was one of the first companies around 1991 to engage its associates in community service. You recently had the Olympics. You partner with all kinds of community organizations. A very strong culture. How did you figure out what to change without violating that culture?
Well, for sure, you don't change the things that you mentioned. We protected, we covered, we nurtured the entrepreneurial spirit, the wonderful values, the DNA that in giving back to the community really builds that same spirit in giving back to the customers. So we wanted to protect that and continue to nurture and build it.
But how did you keep that while also trying to get a little more coherence in the company, so more decisions were being made at corporate, not in each store?
Well, we knew we had to change to get where we wanted to go, Rosebeth. We knew that, again, what got us here wasn't going to get us where we wanted to go, and that's kind of doubling the companies in 5 years, and it's going to take us 6, so I was off about 1 year. We knew we had to centralize our merchandising organization. As a result of that, our average ticket is from $48 to $55. Every dollar of average ticket is $1.2 billion in revenue. We had to centralize to get gross margin, to get the leverage of our size. We went from 28% to over 33% gross margin. We had to change the way we ran our stores. Success did, in fact, breed complacency and arrogance. We put $17 billion back in the last 4 years. We have cleaner, brighter, more shoppable, better navigable stores. We've set out on a quest to have distinctive and innovative merchandise and a pipeline of that. We now do a lot of the things that were being done during the day, like packing out and packing down. We thought it would, why compete with the shoppers? Let's do that at night. So change became the only constant. And to the earlier question about making mistakes, we have a little saying, people who do things make mistakes. They never make the biggest mistake of all, Roosevelt, and that's doing nothing.
That's an interesting common theme. Now that issue of getting people to change and see that, get the message, daily habits, that means, you know, 325,000 people have to change behavior. And many people say that that soft side of people is really the hard side of leadership. It's the more difficult. How did you get the message to 325,000 people and get their daily habits to change?
Well, much like Chuck, my first year I met every store manager in the company. That's 1,800 of them. We've gone on 24/7. We have our own HD TV. We really have set out on a quest to have a learning environment. This year we'll do about $600 million, 23 million hours of training. We've created executive level training all the way down through store manager, assistant store manager. We communicate ad nauseum. Just when we think there's no one in the company that hasn't heard the strategy, our vision, and our values. As you can imagine, opening a new store every 48 hours, we bring on about 25,000 net new associates every year. The need for continual communication, the need for transparency of strategy, and organizational alignment is important. We got to make sure that to the lot attendant, that their work They understand their contribution as it relates to the strategy, and it's either recoverable in our market price or in customer expectation.
Well, that role of communication, by the way, I happen to know, Michael Dell, you once had a football stadium. You rented a football stadium to talk to all of your employees. So communication seems important. And the people side. I mean, Narayana Murthy, he said I should call him, your title is Chairman and Chief Mentor. That says a lot about people. So I want to hear about that and about your values. Now, I have here Home Depot's value statement. Take care of our people, give back to our communities, doing the right thing, excellent customer service, creating shareholder value, building strong relationships, entrepreneurial spirit, respect for all people. Well, you have at Infosys a value statement, your vision and mission. It's called Sea Life, by the way, proving that Americans have no monopoly on cute acronyms for corporate values. Sea Life, customer delight, leadership by example, integrity and transparency, fairness and pursuit of excellence. Now, these values were phrased a little differently, but they sound kind of similar. So I not only want to ask you about the role of values and what it means to be a chief mentor, but you're a company that began in Bangalore, India, and we're talking to another company headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. And it's been said that American company values and Western company values don't translate. In fact, many Asian political leaders have said Asian values are different. Yet those value statements sound pretty similar. So where did your values come from? Are these Asian values or universal business values? And what does it mean to be chief mentor?
You know, I believe that values that we all talk of are primarily universal. Honesty, decency, work ethic, making sure that your customer is happy. These are all universal values. So by and large, I would say that all of our values have been taken from the best corporations that we have watched, that we have learned from. To me, the value system is a protocol for behavior in a community which will enhance the hope, the confidence, the energy, and the enthusiasm of every member of that community in every other member of the community. That's how you make progress. So I do believe that value systems are extremely important. Of course, in the corporate context, we talked about Sea Life, but we can summarize our values in a very simple sentence, and that is, the softest pillow is a clear conscience. As long as you have a clear conscience that you have not shortchanged anybody, as long as you have done the right thing by your customer, by your fellow employees, by your investors, by the society, by your vendor partners, you can sleep well. So I think that's the thing. Now, coming back to your question on mentoring, the biggest ingredient for longevity of a corporation is sustaining and enhancing the energy, enthusiasm, confidence, hope and aspirations, dreaming, daring of every employee of the company. To do that, there's only one instrument, and that is leadership. And the primary objective of every leader is to ensure that there is successive generation of leaders. And one of the instruments for doing that is mentoring. Mentoring is a private relationship. It's a voluntary relationship. The mentee chooses the mentor at Infosys. So it's an honest one. It's one where the moral dilemma, the value system, etc., can be discussed openly and honestly. And hopefully the mentor will use his or her experiential base to give some solutions.
So do you have mentoring throughout the company, formally established, and you are chief? You're chief people officer?
I am the first amongst the equals as far as the mentoring process is concerned.
Okay. Well, now Infosys has been remarkably successful, and in fact, since 2002, revenues have doubled. But your success has put you at the center of a huge political controversy, especially in my home country, over outsourcing.
Sure.
So my question is not to talk about the pros and cons of global outsourcing, but to instead about the responsibilities of a leader. What does a leader do when a company gets caught in a controversy like that? Do you have a responsibility to respond? How do you deal with an issue like that? How can you be proactive? How can you make your case? And what should you do?
I think the biggest responsibility of a leader is to seek the truth. Whether it is a corporation, whether it's a community, nation, it doesn't matter. Seek the truth. Then communicate the truth. Live by the truth. Ensure that you generate and exhibit conviction. And once you seek the truth, eventually things will work out. Most of the confusion in an organization arise because there are different versions of what happened. So it is the responsibility of the leader to get to data, to get to facts. You know, at Infosys we have a saying, we trust in God, everybody else brings data to the table. That's how you avoid biases.
So do you speak that truth, for example, to the press, to politicians, to American voters? How do you speak the truth so that when you find your company caught in a controversy?
Absolutely no problems at all. That's a wonderful question you asked. In fact, I was in Australia last year, and a journalist asked me, "You guys are taking away jobs." I said, "Look, to me, globalization is about sourcing capital from where it is cheapest, producing where it is most cost-effective, and selling where the margins are without being constrained by national boundaries. As long as every nation has a certain competitive advantage and brings the best products and services to the table, then it has a role in the global bazaar. We have to import from the United States, and we have to export to the United States. Today, for example...
So you tell your story. You tell your story.
Absolutely.
Let me turn to Maurice Lévy. And by the way, I thank all these great leaders for their patience, as there's so much rich wisdom here to tap. Maurice Lévy, you have also built a global company based in Paris with many initially partners and now acquisitions. So I want to ask you about this because you're a very relationship-oriented chief executive in a very relationship-oriented business. I mean, you have to work closely with client. Client relationships are one of your real assets, along with creative staffs that don't exactly want to be pushed around. And you have been known as relationship-oriented in terms of very smooth integrations in a world where many mergers are really troubled marriages and don't work. So what is your philosophy of leadership? How have you made these tough relationships work? And it is unusual for a French company to have made acquisitions of American cowboys and whipped them into shape.
Okay, you can put it this way. I would say that the success of Publicis is a little bit of an anomaly in the world, because first the advertising world as well as marketing world are known as being Anglo-Saxon. So what the hell a French company is doing in this field? And obviously this gives us a position which is made of humility, of modesty, and of an approach which is very well embedded in our core values. And one of our core values is, I'm sorry to say it in French, but I have not yet found the good translation in English, which is "Nous croyons en l'homme." And this is something which is very sincere. It is a very soft value which has very little to do with meritocracy or with hardworking, excellence. It has to do with the fact that we do everything we can in order that our people and the people joining us feel good, feel happy, and can give much more than they would give for their money. We believe that pay is important, but in our field of people, it is much more important to feel good. So what we try to do is to create an environment where the people can grow, can bloom, can be happy, and can commit themselves to a point which is far greater than any of our competitors. We are working for clients, and we want our people to feel that they are part of the client, that they have to work much more than the client. They have to lead the client to the challenges that the client is facing, and that is a relationship, but based on a very strong commitment. If you look at mission, statement, and all these kind of things, we have changed this. And instead of having a mission statement, we have what we call our dream. And our dream is to be the communication company that constantly astonishes and inspires through innovative communication.
Now as you transfer that vision to companies you've acquired, how did you avoid the normal us versus them, and we're an American firm or a British firm being taken over by the French? You know, those relationships haven't exactly been easy recently. How did you avoid those sorts of tensions and conflicts so that people would embrace your dream?
Elizabeth, you were talking about failures, and I have to confess that we went through a major failure, a major one. We had a marriage with an American company, an American agency, which was made in love and finished in heaven. But in reality, it was not heaven, it was hell. And very, very quickly, we felt that we were looked at the underdeveloped agency, the people that were not at the standards, maybe because my broken English doesn't help, maybe for other reasons. Anyway, we finished in a divorce, which was very, very difficult and very painful. And we tried to learn. And as always, we are taking a very humble and modest, which is maybe not very French, but sincere approach, which is to say, okay, it's our fault. If something is happening, I'm always starting with the point of view that if something is wrong, it's my fault, and it's the fault of our agency.
We call that accountability. That's a good trait in a leader.
And we went through a process, and what we tried to do with the new marriage is to first spend a lot of time in advance in order to see if there is compatibility. And if compatibility exists, this is fine. If it doesn't, just get out. Even if it is the greatest possible acquisition, I prefer to surrender and to say, okay, I'm not going to play that game. The second thing is that we have made, as a process, a reverse takeover. And if you give me just 30 seconds, we bought an agency called Saatchi & Saatchi, which is very well known, high reputation, troubled, a lot of difficulties, and known as being very creative and known also as being very arrogant. We had the very first meeting in Versailles. It was very nice. We had good lunches, good dinner, good wine, and we agreed on a lot of things. And after 2 months, nothing happened. And people came to my office, my people said, Maurice, you have to show who is the boss. And you have to put your fist on the table and to explain how you should be working now and how they have to be aligned. And I have spent the whole weekend thinking about how we'll address this issue. And I said, okay, we went through a first marriage, it was a mistake. And I will not make the same mistake that the American did with us. So what I found as being a good strategy is to give them the feeling that they bought us. And I had a conversation with the team, and they explained, and they wanted that they had the feeling that they own us. And as a result, we had the most fantastic success story. Not only have we addressed all their margin issues, they have continued to grow, they have been more creative than ever, they were happy, and we have not lost any talent, any client.
So sometimes you can share power and end up multiplying the success of everybody. Thank you, because I need to move on to Chuck Prince, who also is, I hope, going to help us with some of the international dimensions of leadership, because Citigroup is one of, if not the premier global finance, the premier, okay, yeah, thank you. I stand corrected. Premier financial institution in the world, but also one of the truly first global financial institutions. I mean, when I was a young consultant traveling all over the world, every bank, local bank, domestic bank I saw in any part of the world had their leadership team having been trained by Citibank. They had worked for Citibank first. It was always global. And besides those 35,000 handshakes, which I'm sure were not all in New York, you had run the global part, biggest global part of Citigroup. And how do you make sure that all the issues of international diversity, and particularly in a world where globalization still means local community embeddedness, which was a Citigroup value, community embeddedness, how do you make sure that diversity is well managed, that just as Maurice was talking about how he figured out how to manage the Americans who had to feel they were in charge even though they were bought, how do you think about managing such, I mean, you're in every country in the world.
Yes.
And your secrets?
Yes, there's more to that, yes. Citigroup is a unique institution. Citibank, the bank part that you mentioned, goes back to 1812, and we're in 102 countries. We have 300,000 employees. We just reported record earnings of $5 billion, and we've got almost $90 billion of revenue a year. And I give you those statistics not only because I'm extremely proud of the firm, but also to give that sense of scope and breadth and size. We do have the most international platform of any financial institution in the world. We are proud of that. That is a distinguishing characteristic of Citigroup. And in terms of managing that diversity, 98% of our international staff is local. We do not try to run a New York-centric organization around the world. We would fail, I believe, if we tried to do that. And the hallmark, really, of our history, going back now almost 200 years, we're going to celebrate our 200th anniversary in a few years, is that notion of local entrepreneurial responsibility. It used to be, when telecommunications and transportation services were far more rudimentary, it used to be that we would send bankers out with suitcases and they would set up shop and they would succeed or fail with our support, but on their own. This was truly an entrepreneurial organization. And obviously, with modern times, we've moved past that stage. But the notion of local responsibility, local accountability is embedded in our organization. And I cannot tell you how proud I am of our people. We have by far the best people in banking. You mentioned the alumni force. There's not a Treasury Department, a finance department around the world that isn't staffed with ex-Citibankers. As I've gone around here at Davos the last few days, I've met a number of people. I can't tell you how many people have come up to me and said, I used to work at Citibank. And my view is once a Citibanker, always a Citibanker.
Okay, so let me ask you about some of the management issues that arise in a company that's so far-flung and so large. The accountability question. I mean, Citigroup is recovering from some of its own legal challenges, but look at what's about to take place in the United States. We're about to have trials of some of the chief executives of other companies that got mired in scandal, and their defense is going to be the stupidity defense. You know, this company was so big that I, as a CEO, couldn't possibly know, and after all, I'm not the chief financial officer, the stupidity defense, which I think is a little stupid, but there it is. But how much can a chief executive know? How do you get that knowledge so that you will never get in trouble and so that you would never have to say, well, I couldn't possibly have known that that was going on?
Well, of course, in any large institution, whether it's as gigantic as Citigroup or even a more modest-sized institution, you can't possibly know every single transaction or every single detail. What you have to know is that the culture is right, that the people are right, that you put the right people in jobs, you set up redundant safety nets to protect the inherent value of the franchise against rogue employees. I think it's a cop-out to try to hide behind the large size of an organization. Again, I don't know every transaction, but I'm comfortable with my responsibility as a CEO for what happens in my organization.
Thank you. I mean, we've now heard the centrality of people and culture. All the leaders have talked about that, even when the issue had to do with innovation or accountability. That's very striking. I mean, we haven't heard that leadership is all about making all the decisions oneself or even knowing everything, but it's about setting in place the conditions and ensuring the people. Before we turn to Bill Donaldson, who will help us get an overview, I'd like to ask, for those of you in the audience who would like to address a question to any one or several of this stellar group of leaders that we have here. Are there microphones? I can't quite see out there. Yeah, there are microphones, and do we have questions from the audience? I can't believe that we stunned you all into silence. There must be no press here. Actually, Richard, our press representative. Richard, is there a question that comes to mind as you've listened to this array of leadership secrets? Leadership models.
Yes, I mean, do the leaders here, and any one of you can chime in, do you inevitably believe that crisis and disaster will follow at some point during your reign and at the helm?
Well, I can take a first crack at that. I think if you describe crisis and disaster, those are big words. And if I may, I divide it into a couple pieces. Will problems arise? I think the answer to that's clear. Yes. We live in a human world. I have 300,000 colleagues around the world. People make mistakes. People make conscious mistakes sometimes. But we will have problems. Crisis and disaster is partly how you handle problems, and it's partly externalities that come in and invade the organization. So I'm not sure that I would say that I'm, as one, destined to have a crisis or a disaster, but I would bet most of us up here would say we're going to have problems.
Right, let me rephrase what other question then. Do you all believe you will all know when it's time to resign and retire and go off to your pensions? Or when you have to be pushed out?
Well, Michael Dell already made that decision. How about Bob?
I will take the question.
Yes?
I'm in the company since 1971, and I'm the CEO of the company since 16 years, and we have enjoyed the fastest growth and the best growth of the industry. And I'm pretty sure that at a point in time, this will stop. The only thing I hope is that I will put in place a structure which will continue behind me to do better than I have done. And my job today is to put in place people and to empower them in order that when I will see that, I say, okay, it's time for me to go because they are far better than what I have done so far.
Bob?
No, I think succession planning is probably one of the most important things a chairman and CEO has to do today. You know, I've gone through at least 2 of those in my career already. When I left General Electric, you know, that was about a 3-year succession plan, so that's one end of the spectrum. When I joined Home Depot, it was a 1-week succession plan. So somewhere in between there's probably the more appropriate planning process. We invest heavily, myself, we call our committee the LDCC, our Leadership Development and Compensation Committee. And there isn't a board meeting or a committee meeting that, at least in the 4 years I've been there, we aren't seriously looking at succession planning, not only in the executive office, but my entire team and then one layer down. And we challenge every one of members of my staff, who's your successor? And who are we grooming, and what positions are we creating, and what kind of job development, both in the learning and actual hands-on, are we doing to make sure we have people in place to pass the baton to? I mean, the better people you hire, the more it will enhance your ability to lead. It forces you to do things you otherwise would not do.
So hopefully that avoids the imperial CEO trap. Yes, we have a question here.
Hi, Terry Kalogiris from DuPont. Great success stories, all of you tremendous business people, and you explained how you've done it. What I'd be interested in is, you've done it for many years, including Michael Dell. I mean, 20 years or something you've been successful. So if you came in now and they gave you the job again, and there you're replacing some incredible members of the business community, what would you change? Because you'll have to make your mark for the next 20 years. What would you do if you came now into your job and just took over from such successful people as yourselves? That's something I always try to check against myself, just to make sure that I'm not building on just my experience. Thank you very much.
Maurice?
I would move faster. Probably speed is of essence today much more than in the 90s. So I think the key criteria is speed today.
That seems to be, there are a lot of nods up here about speed. Michael, you want to comment about that?
Well, you know, just to make a correction, I have not retired and, and wouldn't plan on retiring for another 20 or 30 years. But I think the answer to your question is we are doing what we would do if we came in today. You know, we are acting as if we just got there, and we have urgent priorities, and we have great opportunities, and we have a tremendous amount to do.
Yes, ma'am. There was a... You get the microphone back to you. Yes. Thank you. Anybody else change something while we're waiting for this?
I just wanted to ask any of the participants if they can share an experience from earlier in their careers that they think was an incredible learning experience to them, helping shape them as leaders.
Incredible learning experience. I don't know whether it was one of those moments when you had to say, I made a mistake, or you already talked, Maurice, about the divorce, the failed acquisition. Are there any others that were a moment that you consider?
I'll give you a very simple one. Our company was about 6 months old, and I was busily working away, and someone walked up to me and said, I lost some money in the soda machine. And I said, well, why are you asking me? And he said, because you have the key to the Coke to the soda machine. and I took the key out of my pocket and said, now you have the key to. So it was an early lesson in delegation for me.
Okay, Murthy, what about you? What was a formative leadership experience? And also, we have to remember that Murthy founded his company in 1981. He was a pioneer, doing things that were a little countercultural. You didn't have a lot of role models.
Well, I think one of the things that I would probably change today is being more dynamic. We were not very dynamic. We were conservative. Our mind was shaped a lot by the socialistic environment that was there around us. We always asked the question, is this possible at all? And I think today our youngsters are a lot more dynamic. They're a lot more confident. I would say that I would use youngsters a lot more than we did in the earlier days.
And do you have a formative experience that helped shape your leader, for early experience that shaped your leadership?
You know, we have always operated as a team, and we always believed in learning from each other. Right from day one, we said we will benchmark on a global scale. Right from day one, we said we will use speed, imagination, and excellence in execution in everything that we do. Right from day one, we said we will follow the finest principles of corporate governance. In that sense, I think it's more of metamorphosis rather than any step change that I have seen.
Before we turn to another question from the audience, John, you want to comment on the early experience?
Sure. I would say being willing to take a risk, to do something totally different in your career. When I first started, I started in investment banking, and so I was a very traditional, hardworking investment banker. And after about 6 years, I was asked to go start a mortgage trading business. Now, I knew absolutely nothing about trading, and my first day on the job, I was the co-head of the mortgage trading desk, which was quite interesting, at least for a while, so I learned something about it. But being willing to do something totally different, taking a risk, and learning a completely new skill, I think is something that helps develop people.
Chuck, did you have one?
Well, I did, actually. I was just thinking of that. In 1990, I had the privilege, these are all people who are heroes, started their own companies, built their own companies. I had the privilege of working next to Sandy Weil for 20 years. And I had one experience which was very formative for me. In 1990, one of our very senior people, big revenue producer responsible for a lot of sales activities, did something, I won't get into the details, but did something which was inappropriate, reflected poorly on the organization in a very serious way. And Sandy decided that the person had to leave. And I remember vividly arguing with him, arguing with my boss, that we shouldn't do that, that it was too dramatic a move, it would be too important to revenues and so forth. Sandy said, absolutely not. We're going to take whatever comes from that. And we actually had, some important results negatively from that for a year or two. But there was no question, you cannot put the franchise at risk. The franchise is an asset shared by everybody. And no one, no matter how powerful, no matter how important, is entitled to put the franchise at risk. And I will remember that day in 1990 till the day I die.
Thank you. And yes, sir, we'll make this the last question because then we want to hear from Bill Donaldson.
Thank you, Rosamund. From what we've heard here...
Can you identify yourself?
Yes, Mickey Obermeyer from McKinsey. From what we've heard here, it would appear that all of you subscribe to the notion that leaders develop, that they're nurtured, and that they're developed through perhaps key leadership experiences. Yet, there must be some inherent capabilities or perhaps traits that people are born with, more or less. And my question to you would be, what are the one or two things that you look for that would allow you to pick the winners of the future in your organizations?
Bob.
I would say I think it's a combination of both. I think there's obviously some inherent skills, but a lot of it is your environment and the opportunity, certainly that I had, it was afforded to me to be in a learning environment. I think you're looking for people that have just a childlike curiosity, an inherent curiosity about everything. People who are looking where the business is going versus where it's been. I know in our case, retail is strewn, the landscape is strewn with people who got locked into a model and couldn't change. I think what I look for are people that can assess a market, that can see megatrends, that connect those megatrends and bring them back to actionable initiatives and then energize the organization and make probably the biggest decisions we make are both on the physical capital and the human capital, continually reprioritizing those and then making sure that the business hasn't outgrown the resources that you've assigned to commensurate with those initiatives. And to Chuck's point, those are some of the toughest changes because the reality is sometimes business will outgrow people, long-time associates, and you'll have to make those changes. So I think the ability to connect the dots, the ability to just absorb as much data in the world today, really look from, increase the globality of your view, and then bring that back to your particular markets and channels.
Maurice?
There is maybe 3 or 4 things that I would like to stress. The first one is that we help our people to be challengers, including in areas where we are worldwide leaders. And I think it's very important that they behave as challenges, that they don't believe that it's already done and there is nothing more to add. The second thing is that they have absolutely to go the extra mile for the client, to have a commitment which is beyond what the competition is doing. So I'm always saying overpromise the competition and overdeliver on your promises. And that is something which is very important. And third, and probably the most important, is to create an environment where there is fearless accountability, that people can move and they know that they have the right to fail, that they will not be blamed because they have failed. They will be blamed for not having tried, but not for having failed.
So again, some common themes across all the discussions of the characteristics that are important in leadership. That still doesn't tell us whether they're born or encouraged or nurtured by all the chief mentors sitting here. But Bill Donaldson has a broad view across leadership in all sorts of sectors, so independent of his current responsibilities at the SEC, which probably limit what he can say, that can be reported on about any particular company. But Bill, what do you take away from this kind of discussion about leadership of great companies? And the things that are going to make companies not only comply, but thrive, and thrive in a sustainable way.
Well, Roosevelt, I wasn't exactly sure what my role was going to be here when they asked me to come to two sessions. Yesterday, the brainstorming session on what makes a great company, and today, a brainstorming session, if you will, on what leadership really means. Richard Quest summarized very well, I think, what went on yesterday in terms of, first of all, for those of you who weren't there, we had a brainstorming session based in the year 2020, 15 years from now, and we went through trying to figure out what the scenario, what the environment would look like for a company that was just getting started in 2020. And he tagged a couple of things that were going to be necessary. It was probably going to be a privately held company. It was not going to be in a marketplace. It was going to be financing itself with new kinds of instruments, stocks and bonds. Equities were something of yore. There were going to be derivatives and new sorts of instruments that divided risk in many different ways to fit the business that they were in. The flexibility of team leadership. Again, I hear this today, team leadership and so forth. I heard a couple of comments, common statements here as we sat here this morning, or this afternoon, that embodied some of the things we talked about yesterday. I mean, the philosophy of people and the growth of people that Mike talked about, John Thane's emphasis on culture and listening and recapturing and reacting to change, about Nardelli's from listening and learning, mentoring, really powerful concept. Fairness is a word I heard for the first time on this stage, but that struck me. And people who can grow and be happy. Now, how do you summarize all of that? Well, I drew down 10 characteristics that I thought ought to be in the great leader, if you will, that we have is going to lead the great company. And let me just cite them, and these are my words, and each of these words capture, for me anyway, a lot of what was said here this afternoon, a lot of what was said yesterday. Number one, integrity. And by this, I mean that integrity and honesty, yes, of course, but a leader who marches to the beat of his or her own internal drummer, who has a sense of what's right and wrong, and that extends not just to obeying SEC rules, but extends to product quality and what you're selling and what you're producing and what you're servicing, an integrity to that is embedded in the DNA of the leader and is imparted to the organization that he leads. Number two, and this is a trade-off of the concept of teamwork, is you surround yourself with people who bring superior skills. You have a willingness and a desire to bring better people into the organization than you are. Now that shouldn't be misunderstood as a lack of ego. Quite the contrary. I think it is a kind of internal ego that can take having smart people around him and her and can take, allows others to perform and to get the credit for performing, and is able to submerge the personal ego in the pleasure of working with superior people. Third, and I think this is the most important characteristic, if you will, and that is a conceptual approach to what you're doing. My great hero in this concept, if you will, is Fred Smith, who started Federal Express. There were all these airplanes on the ground across the country at night, airlines fighting to do all sorts of things, and Fred Smith said, my God, why don't we put these planes to work and take packages from coast to coast? And he built this great company, and he saw something just slightly differently than others saw it. And he had a concept, and he built a company around a concept. Now, I think that conceptual approach is absolutely essential in a changing world where the concept of the CEO, of what business we're in now, and that can change, but there has to be an idea, and probably it has to be an idea that's slightly different than what everybody else is doing. Fourth is something that many of us can't do much about. I've never seen a successful leader, entrepreneur, that wasn't possessed with energy, or blessed, I should say, with energy and drive. There are very few laid-back, great leaders. On the other hand, we all can do something about that. The great leader, I believe, if blessed with basic good health, can enhance that by taking steps to exercise and eat the right things, and also take some time off and stretch the brain in a different way and come back to the job with a new spirit and drive. So energy is an important one. Number five, I'd like to change the definition. I'd like to always link leader not with manager, but leader with entrepreneur. I believe that the word entrepreneur is too narrowly defined. We all think about the entrepreneur as somebody that starts a business or brings entrepreneurial spirit to basically a business operation. For those of you who out there who are not in the private sector, or you're in the public sector or the nonprofit sector, or even as John with the 2 feet in the public sector and in the private sector, I believe that the spirit of entrepreneurialism can take even large, deeply dug-in bureaucracies and pick them up and move them, if you can imbue the bureaucracy with that spirit of entrepreneurialism. Number 6, I think somebody had a message when they gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. I believe the characteristic of the great leader, entrepreneur, is someone who can listen, someone who can genuinely hear what's being said, and basically use the mouth in just about that relationship with the 2 ears. I think the great leader always should have what I call a fallback position. I believe that as you are moving ahead and constantly trying to improve and do what you're doing now, is you have a concept of what you're going to do when something really goes wrong. What's the fallback position? Are you prepared for that? Are you prepared for things going slightly wrong or really wrong? And have you thought through what you're going to do when that happens? I think the true leader, entrepreneur, has an internal sense of demand for excellence. Not a demand that the external people put on him or her, but an internally generated demand for excellence in his own performance, being your own appraiser of exactly how well you're doing and whether your performance measures up to what you want it to be. Second to last, I think is a, I wrote down here, float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. And Cassius Clay had that. But what I mean by that is I think the true leader of the future has to be able to operate on several levels. He or she has to be able to, if you will, float like a butterfly in terms of conceptual approach, in terms of inspirational approach, in terms of all the great things we've been talking about, but also has to have simultaneously the ability to be a hard-nosed taskmaster, to be able to make it work, or bring people around them who will make it work. And that, there are lots of people who got great philosophies and thoughts and so forth, but it doesn't work, because they either don't have that characteristic themselves, or they've been unable to bring it around. And then my last, number 10, if you will, is a concept of having fun. The day we started Donaldson, Lufkin, and Jenrette, we decided that our 10th corporate objective was going to be to have fun. And by that I mean that if you're going to spend all the hours in the day that you spend in your professional occupation, you better damn well be sure that you're enjoying it, that you're being tickled by it. And I don't mean the ha-ha kind of fun, but I mean the fun and the pleasure of working with people, of accomplishing things, a sense of humor that goes with having fun, the ability to laugh when things really are dark. Not that you don't take them seriously, but a sense of proportion that I wrap up in a sense of fun. I mean, I think people have often asked me what was the, you know, having not been able to keep a job and having done a lot of different things, what was the most enjoyable or fun or satisfying or whatever. And I think back to the early entrepreneurial days. I don't know, Mike, whether you would agree with that, when a band of brothers and a couple of sisters got together, started something new, and really had fun doing it.
Thank you, Bill, for what will have to turn out to be an excellent summary, since we're almost out of time. I love the fun point, and clearly from the energy and the smiles on faces of all of you up here, I hope you were having fun today. But let me add two things from the session, rather than the remarks I thought I would make, that make me incredibly hopeful about not only the prospects of the companies represented here, but also about leadership in general, because two things I heard are incredibly heartening. One, leaders willing to say those words out loud, the three little words, I was wrong. That ability, then along with curiosity and vision, etc., but that will move us forward and avoid mistakes in the future because of the willingness to deal with them as they occur. The second was, I heard from so many of you, including company founders, that the institution becomes more important than the person, even when the person's name is on the door. That's so important. If we're going to avoid the cult of the imperial CEO who builds empires in his or her own interest, we need that sense that what you're doing as leaders is not only satisfying your own needs and hopefully having fun, but building something greater than yourselves, that survives yourselves, that brings enormous value to the world. And that's a message that I'm so glad that you provided, at Davos especially, when global capitalism is still a little bit under attack and discredited. That sense that you want to build greatness into your companies is a wonderful message, and thank you for being willing to engage in this informal, candid discussion. Thank you, all of you, for coming.